of the bills. And how was your conversation with Stevie?
Right.
Yeah.
I call the Committee on Transportation Infrastructure to order. Pursuant to Committee Rule 6F, House Rule 11, Clause 2HF, the chairman may postpone further proceedings today on any question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment in which a recorded vote of yeas and nays is ordered. I'd ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's meeting. Without objection, that is so ordered. A bill and amendment text have been distributed electronically, and paper copies are also available here in the hearing room. As a reminder, the committee may use an electronic voting system for any requested recorded votes. Today, the committee is considering an amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6422, the American Water Stewardship Act, H.R. 6267, the Aviation Supply Chain Safety and Security Digitization Act, 2025, an amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5663, the ACPA, the ACPAC, is it ACPAC?
Yes, sir.
Modernization Act, and an amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6427, the Airport Regulatory Relief Act of 2025, H.R. 6460, the Recreation Drone Empowerment Act, and an amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6086, the Aviation Funding Solvency Act. An amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3410, the Supersonic Aviation Modernization Act, H.R. 5783, the State Actions for Employment, Transportation Risk Assessment, and Crossing Knowledge Strategy Act, H.R. 6480, to direct the Administrator of General Services to submit a report to Congress on the state of the real estate portfolio of the Public Building Service and for other purposes, H.R. 6481, the Federal Building Threat Notification Act, and General Service Administration Capital Improvement and Leasing Program resolutions. Finally, I'd ask unanimous consent for the committee to use an amendments roster for any items under consideration by the committee. And without objection, that is so ordered. Our first item for consideration is H.R. 6422, the American Water Stewardship Act, and I'd ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment from further consideration of H.R. 6422, and without objection, that is so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration. Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read and open for amendment at any point. And I recognize Mr. Stauber, Minnesota, to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute at the desk.
Please designate.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6422 offered by Mr. Stauber.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read and shall be considered as base text for the purpose of further amendment. I now recognize Mr. Stauber for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Larson. My legislation, the American Water Stewardship Act, is a comprehensive package that brings together 6 standalone bills to reauthorize and strengthen key EPA water quality and ecosystem restoration programs. The package includes the Beach Act, introduced by Representatives David Joyce, Frank Pallone, David Rouser, and Emily Sykes, which supports coastal water monitoring and helps local communities protect public health. It also reauthorizes the National Estuary Program, championed by Representative Figures and MAST. The package also reauthorizes several geographic programs with strong track records, including the Long Island Sound Program, led by Representative Lalota, and the Columbia River Basin Restoration Program, led by Representative Hoyle. Most importantly, this bill reauthorizes the Great Lakes Restorative Initiative. The Great Lakes Restorative Initiative has long been championed by Representative David Joyce of the great state of Ohio and many other members within the Great Lakes region for years. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, or GLRI, represents the largest federal investment in the Great Lakes, which are vitally important to my home state of Minnesota. GLRI is the largest and arguably the most successful EPA geographic program. Its work focuses on cleaning up areas of concern, those areas in the Great Lakes with significant legacy environmental degradation, reducing non-point source pollution, addressing invasive species, and restoring critical habitat for our local species. Further, the work through the GLRI program is not done in a vacuum. GLRI brings together federal, state, and local governments, along with conservation districts, local communities, nonprofits, and other industry partners to carry out projects across the Great Lakes states. To date, more than 8,000 projects have been completed through the GLRI, generating over $3 in economic activity for every $1 federal dollar invested. This rate of return is just one example why the GLRI is a wise investment of our taxpayer dollars. I would be remiss again if I did not extend my gratitude to Congressman David Joyce for his great work on this effort, and I am happy we have found a legislative vehicle to move this important program forward. Just as important, this package includes strong oversight provisions to ensure these tax dollars are spent efficiently and produce real, measurable results. The GAO reporting requirement in the underlying legislation will give, will give Congress the tools needed to evaluate program performance and ensure these programs are operating at maximum effectiveness. At its core, this package reflects a common sense approach to water stewardship, supporting community-led efforts, encouraging collaboration, and demonstrating that responsible environmental protection can go hand in hand with economic growth and fiscal accountability. I urge my colleagues to support this package, and Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I too support the American Water Stewardship Act, a bipartisan bill that combines several standalone bills that I'm glad to see pass out of the committee. Really proud to be an original co-sponsor of the Estuaries Act, which reauthorizes the National Estuary Program, or NEP, and is included in Section 6 of this bill. The National Estuaries Program is an important resource for supporting locally led efforts to restore and protect the environmental health of estuaries of national significance. I want to thank Representative Figures for his leadership on the NEP, and as co-chair of the Bipartisan Congressional Estuaries Caucus, I also want to thank the other co-chairs, Representatives Bonamici, Herodopoulos, and Mast. H.R. 6422 reauthorizes several other EPA programs that enjoy strong bipartisan support, such as the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, Columbia River Basin Program, and the Beach Act. I want to recognize my Democratic committee colleagues for their work on all of these issues, including Representatives McDonald-Rivet, Skolton, Sykes, Gillen, Hoyle, Brownlee, Pappas, Huffman, Moulton, Poe, and Norton, all of them for their leadership on this comprehensive package. Reauthorizing these EPA programs will allow them to continue the important work they do to restore and protect local aquatic ecosystems. The health of our water resources supports the health of our communities by providing flood protection, storing clean water, and supporting water-based economies. Protecting and restoring the Puget Sound, where I live, the nation's largest estuary by water volume, is essential to our state's environment our culture, and our maritime economy. And that's why I'll continue to champion legislation that will help protect these critical natural resources. So I support the American Water Stewardship Act and urge my colleagues to do the same. With that, I yield back.
I recognize myself real quick. The American Water Stewardship Act, there's no reason for me to repeat what's already been said, but it is a good piece of legislation. I want to thank all the members that had a part in putting this together, and particularly Mr. Joyce for the work that he did. And with that, Donald, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to say something about this piece of legislation because I'm incredibly proud to co-lead the American Water Stewardship Act to protect our communities, ecosystems, and regional economies nationwide. So this legislation reauthorizes funding for long-standing geographic programs, including the historically bipartisan Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. The Great Lakes are a part of our way of life in Michigan, essential to our local economy, our recreational spaces, and our way of life, all while containing over 90% of America's surface freshwater. So the bottom line is the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is our primary tool for restoring and preserving the Great Lakes. Since its inception, over 8,100 restoration projects have been funded across the Great Lakes states, directly benefiting Michiganders and millions of Americans. GLRI projects include controlling invasive species, tracking toxic algae outbreaks across the Great Lakes, restoring wetlands, improving dam safety, and many other invaluable initiatives. It's particularly important and personal in my district. In 2020, historic flooding in Midland County forced more than 10,000 residents to evacuate and caused hundreds of millions of dollars worth of damage after some dams broke. But the damage would have been so much worse. Thanks to the GLRI, our local watershed was instrumental in mitigating further damage and helping the floodwaters to recede. And this initiative goes well beyond protecting our ecosystem, as every dollar invested through GLRI yields more than $3 in economic activity for the region. As my colleague said, it makes good sense. These projects create good-paying jobs across the Great Lakes region, including equipment operators, engineers, biologists, ecologists, plumbers and pipe fitters, and many more at a time when we need to do all that we can to bolster opportunities for Americans. I'm grateful for Representative Stauber's leadership on this needed reauthorization and for the bipartisan support from committee members in ensuring the continued funding of these critical programs. I ask my colleagues to support this vital reauthorization to preserve the treasure that is the Great Lakes for generations to come. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thanks, Kristen. Mr. Weed.
I would like to thank Representative Stauber and McDonald Rivet for their leadership on this bill. This bill would reauthorize the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, an EPA geographic program that was established in 2010 and has had a profound effect on the health of the Great Lakes and the region at large. In my district, habitat restoration, runoff management, and invasive species removal are just some of the ways in which the GLRI works to improve environmental health and strengthen the resilience of communities across the region. The federal government is an essential partner in restoring the Great Lakes and must continue to work with NGOs, industries, businesses, cities, and states to address the highest regional priorities. Invasive species such as sea lampreys and zebra mussels wreak havoc on fishery stocks, while harmful algae blooms continually threaten drinking water supplies for many communities. GLRI investments have yielded impressive results in dealing with these issues, and we must ensure that this work can continue. As a co-sponsor of the standalone GLRI reauthorization, I urge my colleagues to support the passage of this bill, and I yield back.
Anyone else wish to be heard? Seeing no one, we're now considering the bill for amendments. For what purposes, Ms. Skolton? Seek recognition.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Please designate.
An amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6422, offered by Ms. Skolton, number 064.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am so thrilled that this committee is working in a bipartisan fashion to reauthorize the critical EPA regional programs, including the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. The Great Lakes and their connecting channels form the largest freshwater surface system on Earth, constituting nearly 1/5 of the world's freshwater supply and 9/10 of the United States supply. I am so proud to represent miles of beautiful Lake Michigan shoreline. These lakes are not only gorgeous and an environmental powerhouse, they are an economic powerhouse, creating $3.1 trillion in gross domestic product and employing 25.8 million people. Simply put, back home, the Great Lakes are significant to our culture and way of life. GLRI is paramount to preserving these waters and safeguarding our community's public health. The collaborative program ensures safe water for recreational and drinking use, addresses invasive species, and restores habitat. GLRI has made incredible progress in Michigan's 3rd Congressional District. Everyone loves a good comeback story, and the GLRI has one back home in Muskegon Lake. Just 40 years ago, this lake in my district was a symbol of environmental degradation, serving as a dumping ground for industrial pollution, municipal wastewater, and sewer overflows. With investment through GLRI, the EPA removed Muskegon Lake from its list of Great Lakes area of concern. This $10 million feat is anticipated to produce more than $66 million in economic benefit, a 6-to-1 return on investment. This is the kind of good work the EPA regional programs can do, and we cannot take our foot off the brake. So let's not only reauthorize GLRI, but let's ensure that the program's funding levels can keep pace with our community's needs. That's why my amendment increases the funding authorization for GLRI by $200 million to keep pace with the bipartisan infrastructure law's investment into the program. GLRI, as we've all discussed and agree, is a worthwhile investment, with every dollar of the program's funding resulting in approximately 3 in economic activity. Out of respect for the Four Corners Agreement here, I will withdraw this amendment. However, I encourage my colleagues to join me in advocating for continued robust funding of this bipartisan program. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Are there any other amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6422? Hearing none, the question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6422. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is adopted. The question is now on adoption and favorable reporting of H.R. 6422 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed signify by saying nay. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 6422 as amended is agreed to and ordered favorably reported to the House. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Okay. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 6267, the Aviation Supply Chain Safety and Security Digitization Act. I'd ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Aviation from further consideration of H.R. 6267 without objection. That is so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration without objection. The first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read and open for amendment at any point. And I recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'd like to thank Mr. Knott for his leadership on this important issue, and Ms. Skolton for her important work on this bipartisan bill. The safety of our airspace is our top priority, and this extends down to the raw materials and components used to manufacture and maintain aircraft. Recent reports of bad actors falsifying paperwork, leading to unapproved parts entering the supply chain, means we need to do more to authenticate documents and interpret counterfeit parts. As a general aviation pilot who also works on vintage aircraft, vintage warbirds that I and others fly, I know firsthand the very important aspect of dependable components to make the job, to make sure that the job is done right and to make sure that the airplanes are safe. This legislation is going to help everyone in the aviation supply chain verify the authenticity of materials and parts that they purchase. Further, the bill also builds on the bipartisan work of the committee from last Congress, supporting the Federal Aviation Administration as they implement provisions to digitize legacy paper systems as required by the FAA Reauthorization Act that we did in 2024. I'd urge support for the legislation. I now recognize Ranking Member Larson for his statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support H.R. 6267, the Aviation Supply Chain Safety and Security Digitization Act. It's bipartisan legislation that Representatives Knott and Skolton introduced. U.S. innovation, economic growth, and global leadership are impossible without our nation's aerospace industry. In the Pacific Northwest, aviation and aerospace are part of our DNA, with tens of thousands of dedicated women and men going to work in these industries each day in my own district. These hardworking individuals range from engineers to line workers, and they make significant contributions to local communities. Unfortunately, the last 5 years have taught us through pandemics, tariffs, and quality control issues just how much supply chain disruptions can spiral and compound. That's why in 2022, I co-sponsored H.R. 8049, the Aerospace Supply Chain Resiliency, Innovation, and Advancement Act of 2022, which established an Aerospace Supply Chain Resiliency Task Force to assess risks to the U.S. aerospace supply chain. On November 4th, 2024, the task force finished its work and delivered its final report, which raised numerous concerns, including the lagging digitization of parts of the aviation industry. Building off of these findings and those of other industry studies, this particular bill, 6267, directs the GAO to conduct a study on the impediments to the use of digital documentation and the verification in the aviation supply chain to aid in identifying falsified documentation and counterfeit parts. As a major driver of the U.S. economy, we have to ensure the aerospace supply chain remains resilient. To achieve that, we have to remove any unnecessary or antiquated barriers where we can. This bill will help Congress find ways to expedite the aerospace supply chain's digital transition. So I encourage my colleagues to support H.R. 6267. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Knott.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this markup today, and thank you for considering my bill, H.R. 6267, the Aviation Supply Chain Safety and Security Digitization Act. I also want to thank my friend and colleague from Michigan, Representative Hillary Schulten, for joining me as a sponsor of this important piece of legislation. Mr. Chairman, on December 17, 1903, the Wright brothers conducted the first successful powered flight at Kill Devil Hills in my home state of North Carolina. 122 years and 1 day later, in an age when many members of Congress traverse the continent twice a week, we often take for granted the delicate complexity of airplanes, millions of parts and their components working together to ensure passengers take off and land tens of thousands of times every day. The FAA applies strict scrutiny to the supply chain and requires certification documents for each part following its manufacturing, assembly, and/or repair. This is known as an Authorized Release Certificate, or an ARC. These documents certify each part and its components meet the rigorous airworthiness standards before an FAA-certified technician performed any necessary work. Unfortunately, and ironically, ARCs and similar certificates represent a weak link in our supply chain security today. Despite ample technological advances since the Wright brothers' first flight, the FAA's record-keeping is stuck in 1903. In the 21st century, only ink and paper prop up one of the most delicate supply chains upon which we rely every day. A few forged signatures are all that it takes for nefarious actors to inject hundreds, if not thousands, of dangerous, fraudulent parts into planes, whether here or around the world. This is not a phantom threat. Just recently in the summer of 2023, when performing maintenance on an airline engine, employees of the Air Portugal Airlines discovered some of the engine parts were noticeably older than their documentation represented them to be. This was reported to the authorities. The FAA and European authorities alerted the aviation industry to check on their planes. This revealed that questionable parts had infiltrated 126 airplane engines affecting Delta, American, United, and Southwest Airlines, again, that Americans fly on every day. My bill is a simple, industry-driven step towards defending against this type of nefarious activity. The Aviation Supply Chain Safety and Security Digitization Act would require the GAO to conduct a study into barriers preventing the FAA and the aviation industry from bringing their supply chain security into this century, digitizing ARCs and other safety documents to prevent bad actors from easily compromising aircraft across the country. My bill would also require the GAO to make recommendations to Congress on ways to accelerate the FAA's ability to adopt digital documentation and a path to voluntary adoption within the aviation industry. Again, I want to thank all the members of the aviation industry who joined in this effort. The coalition's quick and focused efforts in response to the 2023 incident laid the groundwork for this bill. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 6267. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Does anyone else wish to be heard? Ms. Colton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm so proud to co-lead the Bipartisan Aviation Supply Chain Safety and Security Digitization Act with my colleague, Congressman Brad Knott. Thank you for your leadership. This common sense bill builds on the work of the Aerospace Supply Chain Resiliency Task Force. This task force report to Congress underscored a concerning rise in counterfeit or improperly documented aerospace parts in the supply chain. Because FAA documentation proving the airworthiness of these parts is not digitized, authorized release certificates are easy to forge, allowing bad actors to slip fraudulent parts into the supply chain. This bill will charge the GAO with conducting a study on the barriers to adopting digital documentation and verification through the entirety of the aerospace supply chain. The report will include suggestions on voluntary digitization as well as best practices to catalyze digital documentation. West Michigan is home to countless innovative aerospace manufacturers. We need our federal processes to keep pace with industry, and that starts with exploring how digitizing critical paperwork can prevent counterfeit parts from entering the supply chain, endangering passengers around the world. I want to thank Congressman Knott for his leadership, and I urge my colleagues to join us in passing this straightforward legislation to bolster safety. Thank you, and I yield back.
Does anyone else wish to be heard? Seeing no one, are there any amendments to H.R. 6267? Seeing none, we will now proceed to final passage on the legislation. The question is now on the adoption and favorable reporting of H.R. 6267. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. H.R. 6267 is agreed to and will be favorably reported to the House. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Before I call up the next bill, I want to recognize Mr. Larson for a brief moment to highlight the work of a staffer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We're here on whatever date it is, end of the year. We're likely done today and back after the first of the year. When we get there, we will be without a longtime staffer here on our side of the aisle. And I want to take a moment to thank our aviation staff director, Brian Bell, who is staffing this last markup today. Someone's happy that he's staffing his last markup today, I guess. I think that was Brian. If you're in this room, you've benefited from Brian's unmatched aviation expertise on the aviation subcommittee over the last 7 years. He has shepherded complex bills through this committee, including the 2024 FAA Reauthorization Act and the Aircraft Certification Bill. His time on T&I did not start there. He served 2 T&I members from the California delegation, Janice Hahn and Laura Richardson, for 4 years. His time on the committee staff and as a legislative assistant spans the majority and the minority, so he has seen this committee room from pretty much every angle. He has shown an unwavering commitment to enacting sound aviation policy and securing legislative wins for members of this committee. More importantly, Brian brings a very calm, a very steady presence under pressure. This is particularly helpful in tragic times, as we've seen recently, of aviation crises in responding to member questions any time of the day or night. Most importantly, we have all benefited from Brian's friendship. So Brian, we will miss you. Best of luck to you and your family as you engage in the next chapter of your life and your work life. Brian Bell.
I too want to recognize Brian for his years of hard work on the Aviation Subcommittee. You know, many years, Brian has been a great partner in formulating and passing legislation, including one of my favorite pieces of legislation, and that's the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024. You've always approached issues with professionalism and commitment to bipartisanship, and for that, I'm grateful. So, congratulations. Thanks. Yep. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 5663, the Aviation Consumer Protection Advisory Committee Modernization Act. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Aviation from further consideration of H.R. 5663, and without objection, that is so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration, and without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read and open for amendment at any point. And I'd recognize Ms. Titus to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Please designate.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5663, offered by Ms. Titus of Nevada.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read and shall be considered as base text for further amendment. I now recognize Ms. Titus for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I would urge my colleagues to vote yes on this. It's called the APAC Modernization Act. It's just common sense legislation that will help improve consumer protection in aviation while also supporting our tourism economy. The Aviation Consumer Protection Advisory Committee, or ACPAC, provides recommendations to the Department of Transportation for improving consumer protection in aviation. This bill would simply expand the committee's membership to include a representative for ticket agents. Now, ticket agents build their businesses off of their unmatched expertise on the wants and needs of travelers. So it's no wonder then that the ticket agents facilitate many of the sales across the country, and in Nevada, that's just about half of all of them. Nobody does hospitality and tourism like we do it in Las Vegas. So protecting our economy is one of my top priorities here in Congress. And that effort is more important now than ever because of the slump that we're seeing in tourism, not just in my district, but in many of your districts as well. This bill will give travel agents a seat at the table as a voting member on this committee alongside air carriers, airport operators, and other stakeholders in aviation. I look forward to working in a bipartisan manner to ensure that a ticket agent is added to this committee, as well as some of the other committees that are required under statute, and to do that without delay. When we prioritize consumer protections and the passenger experience in aviation from the time you get on the plane to the time you reach your destination, everybody wins. So I thank you for bringing up the bill, and I ask for your support. I yield back.
I now recognize myself for 5 minutes, and I'd like to thank Representative Titus for your hard work on this legislation. Now, travel advisors and ticket agents are an important consumer-facing side of our national air transportation system. They sell more than 780,000 airline tickets per day and accounted for more than $99 billion in airlines ticket sales last year. They know what works well for consumers and what does not, and I think they should have a seat at the table when discussing consumer regulations. This legislation builds on the bipartisan work this committee from last Congress. In the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024, we reauthorized the Aviation Consumer Protection Advisory Committee. And further, a provision similar to this bill was included in the House-passed FAA reauthorization, but it ultimately fell out during conference negotiations. So this legislation simply adds a representative of ticket agents to the advisory committee, and I'd urge support for the legislation. Now recognize Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the ANS to H.R. 5663, the ACPAC Modernization Act, bipartisan legislation that Representative Titus introduced. The flying public's travel experience from the terminal curb to the flight to the destination airport remains a top priority of this committee. It's why the 2024 FAA reauthorization made several reforms to improve the flying public's travel experience and strengthen consumer protections. This included reauthorizing the Department of Transportation's Aviation Consumer Protection Advisory Committee, which evaluates existing consumer protections and provides recommendations to the Secretary of Transportation for improving the aviation consumer experience. This bill will add a representative for ticket agents to the ACPAC. The T&I committee included this change in the House FAA reauthorization bill as noted. Unfortunately, it was not included in the final bill. In 2024, travel agents sold 781,000 airline tickets daily, totaling $99.2 billion in annual sales. Given their expertise in the aviation consumer experience in the aviation industry, as well as consumers' growing interest in purchasing airline tickets from ticket agents, a representative for travel agents would enhance ACPAC's work. So I encourage my colleagues to support the ANS to HR 5663, and with that, yield back.
Does anyone else wish to be heard on the amendment? Mr. Carson.
Thank you, Chairman. I support HR 5663, the Aviation Consumer Protection Advisory Committee Modernization Act, brought by my good friend Representative Titus and Representative Billarakis. This committee helped to pass several critical provisions in the 2024 FAA reauthorization law to help consumers have a better flying experience. This included requirements for passengers to receive automatic refunds, requiring airlines to develop policies to reimburse passengers for travel, meal, and hotel accommodations when experiencing a flight disruption, and requiring airlines to allow young children to sit next to their parents on a plane. I supported this provision when it was originally introduced and included in the House reauthorization, and I'm glad to support it now. Thank you for introducing this important bill, Congresswoman. I encourage my colleagues to do the same. I yield back. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to be heard? Seeing no one, are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of substitute to HR 5663? Hearing none, the question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute to HR 5663. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is adopted. The question is now on adoption and favorable reporting of HR 5663 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and HR 5663 as amended is agreed to and ordered favorably reported to the House. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is HR 6427, the Airport Regulatory Relief Act of 2025. I'd ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Aviation from further consideration of HR 6427. Without objection, that is so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration. Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill is now considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I'd recognize Mr. Begich of Alaska to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute at the desk.
Please designate.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute to HR 6427 offered by Mr. Begich of Alaska.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered as base text for the purpose of further amendment. I now recognize Mr. Begich for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to offer this amendment in the nature of a substitute for HR 6427, the Airport Regulatory Relief Act of 2025. This straightforward, common-sense bill will provide much-needed regulatory relief to small, non-primary airports across the country by allowing them to use state highway construction standards for certain airfield pavement projects. Under current law, any federally funded airport pavement work must follow rigid FAA specifications. While these standards are essential for major commercial hubs handling heavy jet traffic, they often impose unnecessary costs and complexity on smaller facilities that primarily serve lighter aircraft. My legislation permits the Secretary to accept a state's highway specifications for pavement construction and improvements at non-primary airports serving aircraft weighing no more than 60,000 pounds gross weight. This flexibility is contingent on two key safeguards. The state must notify the Secretary of its intent to use these standards, and the Secretary must determine that they will not compromise safety. This change is particularly vital for rural and remote communities, and nowhere is that more evident than in my home state of Alaska, where aviation is a lifeline. In Alaska, 82% of our communities are accessible only by air, supporting everything from the delivery of everyday goods and medical evacuations to economic connectivity in harsh roadless terrains. We have hundreds of public airports in Alaska, the vast majority of which are non-primary facilities serving bush planes and general aviation. These include essential hubs that help keep our villages alive, but face skyrocketing construction costs under a one-size-fits-all federal set of rules. Alaska's unique challenges already drive up expenses. Our state highway standards are battle-tested in these conditions and more than adequate for lighter load airfields. By allowing their use, this bill will reduce project costs significantly while speeding up improvements and saving taxpayer dollars without sacrificing safety. It's a win for efficiency, a win for rural economies, and a win for states with outsized aviation needs like Alaska. Mr. Chairman, this is targeted relief that empowers states and ensures our small airports remain viable. I thank my colleagues from Hawaii, Jill Takuda and Ed Case, as well as my colleague from Ohio, Dave Taylor, for their leadership on this legislation, and I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this important effort. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the ANS to H.R. 6427, the Airport Regulatory Relief Act. It's bipartisan legislation that, as Representative Begich noted, is sponsored by Representative Case and Takuda from Hawaii and Representative Taylor from Ohio. Current law provides small general aviation non-primary airports with flexibility in how they construct runways by granting them the choice of using either federal aviation paving standards or state highway paving standards. The runways must only service small planes, and the DOT must determine it would not decrease aviation safety. Unfortunately, local and rural airports have been having trouble with the time it takes the DOT to make these determinations. So the ANS to HR 6427 would place a time limit of 6 months on the determination. If more time is needed to conduct the safety review, the DOT may take successive 6-month extensions so long as the DOT also notifies the airport and provides the airport with such a justification. This deadline and extension process will help increase transparency for applicant airports, will now be more regularly updated, and ensure accountability by requiring the justification. So I encourage my colleagues to support H.R. 6427. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman Graves and Ranking Member Larson, for allowing me to speak in favor of the Airport Regulatory Relief Act of 2025. Ohio's airports play a vital role in the safe transport of goods and people and are huge assets to the local communities they serve. However, when these mid-size airports like the ones in Southern Ohio seek to make simple infrastructure repairs, they often face difficulty with the FAA's design standards, causing increased costs and project delays. Thankfully, the Airport Regulatory Relief Act provides much-needed relief by removing barriers to allow states to use their state highway standards for these repairs. This change will not only decrease project timelines, but also lower costs while ensuring that our airports remain safe. I want to thank Representative Begich for leading this effort, and I was proud to help introduce this legislation that frees small local airports from burdensome government requirements. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this common sense legislation, and I yield back.
Does anyone else wish to be heard? Recognize myself for just a minute. H.R. 6427, I think, is a common sense piece of legislation. It obviously reduces the burden on states seeking to use their highway specifications for these airfield projects. This legislation is going to ensure that airfield improvements are delivered faster and more efficiently for communities that need it most, while still upholding safety. And I want to thank Mr. Begich for his leadership on this issue. Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6427? Hearing none, the question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6427. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute is adopted. The question is now on adoption and favorable reporting of H.R. 6427 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. And H.R. 6427 as amended is agreed to and ordered favorably reported to the House. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The next item for consideration is H.R. 6460, the Recreation Drone Empowerment Act, and I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Aviation from further consideration of H.R. 6460, and without objection, that is so ordered. And I now call up the bill for consideration. Without objection, the first reading of the bill will be dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read and open for amendment at any point, and I'd recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'd like to thank Representative Mann for his initiative and leadership on this issue. I've said it before, but it warrants repeating. General aviation, including recreational drone pilots, are the lifeblood of the American aviation ecosystem. And therefore, it is of utmost importance that we protect our access to the sky. Community-based organizations, as discussed in Section 928 of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024, play a vital role in attracting America's next generation of aviation enthusiasts. Unfortunately, the FAA's interpretation of Section 928 has resulted in recreational unmanned aircraft system clubs being unable to legally fly in certain sectors of Class E airspace. This legislation represents a very common sense solution to ensure that CBOs can seek authorization to operate legally in all types of Class E airspace as Congress intended. This is a good bill, and it actually means a lot to a lot of people out there that I know and know very well. I'd urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I'd yield back and recognize Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support H.R. 6460, the Recreational Drone Empowerment Act, bipartisan legislation that Representative Mann and Representative Davids introduced. The FAA reports there are more than 371,000 registered recreational drones in the U.S. As this committee, the FAA, and aviation stakeholders work to ensure the integration of drones into U.S. skies, we have to ensure the necessary framework is in place. This bipartisan legislation makes a technical correction to a current statute authorizing the FAA through its approval process to permit eligible recreational drone flights in certain Class E controlled airspace and Class G uncontrolled airspace. This bill will help reduce some confusion for recreational drone operators and clarify the FAA's authorization process for these drone flights. To clarify, this bill will not automatically allow for recreational drone flights near airports or higher altitude operations in uncontrolled airspace. Drone operators would still be required to comply with FAA security requirements and to go through the agency's approval process. So I encourage my colleagues to support H.R. 6460. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Mann.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the consideration of my bill, H.R. 6460, the Recreational Drone Empowerment Act, which clarifies the ability of the FAA to authorize model aircraft operations in Class E airspace. Everyone gets their start somewhere. For many folks, a lifelong passion for flight is ignited for the first time they get to experience what model aeronautics has to offer. For some, that passion leads them ultimately pursue long and successful careers in the aviation workforce. As such, I feel strongly about the need to foster a robust recreational operational environment where individuals of all ages can experience what aviation has to offer. 2018, Congress classified model aircraft as recreational UAS. That legislation spelled out what classes of airspace and under what conditions recreational UAS could fly. For 7 years, and on behalf of its 2,400 member clubs, of which 30 reside in the great state of Kansas, the Academy of Model Aeronautics, AMA, has been collaborating with the FAA to attract the next generation of aviation professionals. Frankly, due to misinterpretation of a provision of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024, many recreational clubs across the country found they were no longer able to legally fly in some sectors of Class E airspace. The Recreational Drone Empowerment Act allows model aircraft clubs to request permission from the FAA to operate in Class E2, E3, E4, and E5 airspace, as it does for all other classifications of airspace. This legislation does not require the FAA to grant such a request. It merely grants the FAA the legal authority to approve such request. I want to thank my colleague, fellow Kansan, Representative Davids, for co-sponsoring the legislation with me. I would also like to thank Chairman Graves and Ranking Member Larson for their support of my legislation that will give regulatory certainty to an important part of the aviation community. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation and yield back the balance of my time.
Does anyone else wish to be heard? Seeing no one, are there any amendments to H.R. 6460? Seeing none, we will now proceed to final passage of the legislation. The question is now on the adoption favorable favorable reporting of H.R. 6460. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 6460 is agreed to and will be favorably reported to the House. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 6086, the Aviation Funding Solvency Act. I'd ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Aviation from further consideration of H.R. 6086, and without objection, that is so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration. Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill is now considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I recognize myself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. Clerk, please designate the amendment.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6086, offered by Chairman Graves.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as a base text for the purpose of further amendment. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'm proud to support H.R. 6086, the Aviation Funding Solvency Act, which I introduced alongside Ranking Member Larson, Aviation Subcommittee Chair Nels, and Aviation Subcommittee Ranking Member Carson. The Aviation Funding Solvency Act ensures that air traffic controllers and other Federal Aviation Administration professionals responsible for managing the airspace are going to continue to receive pay in the event of a government shutdown. The bill would allow the FAA during a shutdown to tap into the Aviation Insurance Revolving Fund to cover critical services that will keep our aviation system running safely for the traveling public, all while ensuring the revolving fund remains at a healthy balance to address potential war risk insurance claims. All of us in this room are deeply grateful to the federal employees, including air traffic controllers, who showed up day in and day out to perform their duties during the government shutdown. This bill ensures that no air traffic controller or FAA professional will have to decide between showing up to do their day job or taking a side job to ensure that they can continue to provide for their families in the event of lapsed appropriations. This is a good piece of legislation, and I think this is finally maybe the answer to get through this process. I now want to enter into the record for the following letters and statements of support for H.R. 6086, the Aviation Funding Solvency Act, from 70 stakeholders spanning the entire aviation community, including air traffic controllers, pilots, airlines, airports, general aviation, the travel industry, and many, many more that are in here. Again, I would urge my colleagues to support this common sense legislation and recognize Ranking Member Larson.
Thank you, Chair. Support H.R. 6086, the Aviation Funding Stability Act. It's bipartisan legislation I introduced with Chair Graves and Nels and Ranking Member Carson. Consideration of this bill comes at a critical time for U.S. aviation. As we continue to assess the damage of the longest shutdown in the nation's history and begin a busy holiday travel season, we find ourselves about 6 weeks away from another potential government shutdown. For 43 days during the latest shutdown, our aviation system faced unprecedented challenges, but thanks to the hardworking women and men of the entire aviation workforce, the flying public safety remained the top priority. These talented individuals worked long hours, sacrificed time with loved ones, faced undue scrutiny, and for many, did it without pay, making already difficult jobs even more stressful. Despite this immense pressure, they never wavered from their duty to ensure aviation safety. But history cannot repeat itself again. We cannot allow political games to jeopardize the livelihood of the aviation workforce or the safety of U.S. skies. The Bipartisan Aviation Funding Solvency Act will guarantee the FAA workforce will be paid and allows the agency to operate uninterrupted during future government shutdowns. Under this bill, the FAA would tap into the Aviation Insurance Revolving Fund, also known as the War Risk Program, which has a balance of about $2.6 billion to cover the cost of keeping our airspace running safely and efficiently. H.R. 6086 also has guardrails in place to ensure the War Risk Program isn't completely drained and that pay for critical aviation safety employees is prioritized in the event of insufficient funds. The Aviation Funding Solvency Act is a common sense legislation. It will let the FAA continue to do its job and ensure the dedicated women and men who work for the FAA are paid during future shutdowns. So my thanks to the chairs and to Ranking Member Carson for their partnership and the Modern Skies Coalition. There's more than 50 aviation industry, aviation labor unions, and safety organizations all endorsing this legislation. I encourage my colleagues to support H.R. 6086. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Nels.
Thank you, Chairman Graves. I'm proud to support H.R. 6086, the Aviation Funding Solvency Act, which was introduced by, of course, our great chairman, Ranking Member Larson, myself, and Subcommittee Ranking Member Carson as original co-sponsors. We have seen firsthand, we saw it just recently, the crippling effects that shutdowns can have on air traffic controllers, the FAA professionals, and most importantly, the traveling public. It doesn't have to be that way, and quite frankly, the American people deserve better. The Aviation Funding Solvency Act ensures that those responsible for safe and efficient operations in the national airspace are protected from the consequences that come from a lapse in federal funding. I was proud to join Chairman Graves in introducing this legislation and remain proud to be here advocating for its passage. Government shutdowns should not put the safety of the traveling public at risk. This bipartisan legislation ensures we avoid unnecessary strain on our aviation ecosystem by ensuring those responsible for maintaining it aren't faced with financial uncertainties. I urge all of my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back, sir.
Mr. Carson.
Thank you, Chairman Graves. Ranking Member Larson, Chairman Nels, and myself. During the recent government shutdown, over 10,000 certified professional controllers and more than 3,000 trainees, along with countless critical aviation safety workers, were forced to work without pay. Most of these jobs require long hours in a highly stressful environment. As a result, many aviation workers worried about getting a second job to feed their families and afford child care while still showing up every day to protect the flying public. And while travelers experienced progressively worse delays and cancellations, the hardworking women and men of the aviation workforce incurred long-term stress, uncertainty, and damage behind the scenes. We cannot subject such critical safety and workforce-dependent institutions to shut down again. Congress must do our jobs and get our appropriations bills passed on time. And while this fund is critical, it is rarely utilized and has accumulated a balance of more than $2.6 billion. Over 50 key aviation stakeholders have endorsed this legislation either independently or through the Modern Skies Coalition. I, along with Chair Graves, Ranking Member Larson, and Chair Nails, urge everyone to support H.R. 6086 so we can insulate aviation safety from politics and support our workers. I yield back, Chairman.
Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am in strong support of this common sense measure today. One of the more dubious distinctions of this Congress was the longest government shutdown in history, where the American people saw firsthand the consequences of gridlock in this institution and the failure to be able to perform the most basic role of assuring that the government is funded. And this, of course, had terrible and cascading consequences for millions of people across the country. But perhaps the most jarring was the fact that our air traffic controllers had to go without paychecks. Our air traffic controllers, one of the most high-stakes, stressful jobs in the country, people charged with assuring the safety of many, many air travelers throughout the country every day, are suddenly being told, you need to show up to work without being paid. Some of these people had to go and drive an Uber, deliver DoorDash after work just to be able to put food on the table for their families. Now, I know that folks at the Department of Transportation made sure that even under these dire circumstances, safety was the top priority. It nevertheless was far from reassuring for the traveling public, knowing that the folks charged with assuring the safety of our skies and at our airports were having to work under these conditions. So I almost, hesitate to endorse a measure like this that is predicated on the inevitability, or at least the possibility, of another government shutdown. I'd like to be able to say we're not going to have any more government shutdowns, but unfortunately, they have become a recurring feature of modern politics. And so I think it is perfectly sensible to avoid another self-inflicted wound that we just suffered when it comes to air traffic control by assuring with this measure that even in the event of a government shutdown, as unacceptable as that is, the tremendous air traffic controllers we have working across this country will continue to receive their paychecks. I yield back.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in support of the Aviation Funding Solvency Act. This year, aviation workers have been under enormous pressure through long hours, high stakes, and constant stress. Too often, they've had to keep our skies safe while the system around them struggles. The Aviation Funding Solvency Act is a simple but powerful message. We've got your back. During the record-breaking 43-day shutdown, our air traffic controllers worked without pay. Many were, or all of them actually, were threatened by the president that if they called out sick from their already high-stress jobs, they would be fired. Made them feel like slaves. This is an outrage. This bill ensures that if Congress can't pass a budget on time, aviation workers still get paid. In an economy where rent, bills, and daily costs keep rising, no one should have to worry about becoming a temporary slave. No one should have to worry about putting food on the table while keeping millions of Americans safe every day. This is also about finally giving respect, stability, and support to the people who keep our aviation system running. When the government falters, this bill guarantees that our workers don't have to suffer. This is where promises meet action. I support this bill, Mr. Chairman, and I urge my colleagues to do the same, and with that, I yield back.
Does anyone else wish to be heard? Seeing no one, are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6086? Hearing none, the legislation is on adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6086. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute is adopted. The question is now on adoption and favorable reporting of H.R. 6086 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 6086 as amended is agreed to in order favorably reported to the House. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 3410, the Supersonic Aviation Modernization Act. I'd ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Aviation from further consideration of H.R. 3410, and without objection, that is so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration. Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I recognize Mr. Nels of Texas to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Chairman Graves. I am proud to support H.R. 3410, the SAM Act.
We got to designate.
Oh,
Go ahead and offer it.
I'll offer an amendment, nature of substitute.
Please designate.
I support
An amendment
this.
in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3410, offered by Mr. Nels of Texas.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read and be considered as a base text for further amendment. Now I recognize Mr. Nels for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. I'm proud to support H.R. 3410, the SAM Act, which I introduced with my colleagues from North Carolina and Kansas, Ms. Davids. Make no mistake about it, it's critical that America be the global leader in hypersonic and supersonic technology. I'm grateful to have a president in the White House who recognizes the importance of innovation in this sector. To echo Chairman Graves' point, the president has done his job, and now it's time for Congress to continue this effort legislatively. The SAM Act directs the administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration to issue or revive current regulations that are outdated and, in some cases, create an artificial speed limit hampering American innovation. Despite these restrictions, technology has continued to mature and has demonstrated that it's feasible to conduct supersonic operations in the national airspace without generating a sonic boom that reaches the ground. It is my hope that the SAM Act, in tandem with the applicable provisions in last year's FAA reauthorization law, usher in a new age of American innovation in the skies. Much like a supersonic aircraft, blink and the moment will be gone. And to that end, the time is now. Let's come together and support American businesses and innovation. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I support the ANS to H.R. 3410, the Supersonic Aviation Modernization Act. Supersonic aviation has the potential to completely transform how everyday Americans travel, and the ability to travel from New York to London in a little over 3 hours or coast to coast in half the time would provide untold benefits to companies with international operations or individuals with families spread around the country. It's a clear example of how new innovations in aerospace can provide invaluable benefits to our constituents in the future. However, supersonic aircraft are currently prohibited from operating in the U.S. without a special authorization from the FAA. This bill, the Bipartisan Supersonic Aviation Modernization Act, would change this by requiring the administrator to revise current regulations to allow for supersonic flight as long as no sonic boom hits the ground. Furthermore, the ANS made significant improvements to the underlying bill by ensuring any noise from these new aircraft is adequately addressed. For instance, the bill would call for the administrator to issue a final rule establishing noise standards prohibiting supersonic aircraft from exceeding the most recent takeoff and landing noise levels required of subsonic aircraft currently in operation. That means the supersonic aircraft will actually end up quieter than many aircraft we hear every day. Furthermore, it ensures these noise standards will continue to be reviewed and further updated in the future to reflect the latest advances in aircraft technology. And while this committee should look at how we can make supersonic flight more sustainable, I'm greatly encouraged by the fact that leading companies in this space have designed their aircraft to fly 100% on sustainable aviation fuel. This eventual benefits to consumers are clear: less time in the aircraft, more time building that new business, or spending time with family and loved ones. And I want to thank Chair Nels, who is willing to work with us to address our initial concerns and make a good bill even better. I also want to thank Representative Davids for her crucial support of this legislation, and I encourage my colleagues to support the ANS to H.R. 3410. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Rouser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Supersonic Aviation Modernization Act modernizes outdated aviation rules and helps keep America leading the world in aerospace innovation. I'm especially proud of what this means for my home state of North Carolina, which is quickly becoming a national hub for the next generation of aerospace. North Carolina is home to many innovative aviation companies, including supersonic aircraft manufacturers. And North Carolina's research talent is also helping to drive high-speed flight, including supersonic testing capabilities at my alma mater, NC State University. This bill provides regulators and industry clear guardrails and creates a path for next-generation supersonic technology to be deployed both safely and effectively. So I especially want to thank my friend and colleague, Congressman Nels and Congresswoman Davids, for their work. I urge my colleagues to support this very important bill. I yield back.
Does anyone else wish to be heard?
Chris.
Mr. Carson.
Thank you, Chairman. As the new ranking member of the Aviation Subcommittee, I'm always looking for new ways to help our constituents have a safer and more enjoyable flying experience. That's why I co-sponsored the Aviation Funding Solvency Act, which will ensure FAA employees are paid and reduces the chance of a disruption during a government shutdown. This bill is the first step to eventually allowing Americans to travel across the country at almost half the time it takes now, allowing more time to be productive, enjoying new experiences, and spending the time with loved ones and not on a plane. The legendary supersonic Concorde was beloved by her passengers for transatlantic flights, but it was eventually retired after travel and business dynamics changed. Fortunately, engineering and innovation have soared since then, and new technology has advanced so much that it's possible for supersonic flights to travel overland without producing disruptive sonic booms. It would also create a number of safeguards that will help ensure these aircraft won't create noise levels any higher than aircraft currently operating. It would also call for future updates to the standard to ensure these aircraft become even quieter in the future. While this technology is still several years from being certified, this bill creates a pathway that has the potential to benefit millions of Americans. I'd like to thank Chairman Nails for his vision and commitment to innovation by introducing this important bill. I yield back.
Anyone else wish to be heard on the legislation? I got a chance to see this technology recently at a aviation conference, and they're using a very sophisticated mathematical process or logarithm, which takes into consideration humidity, temperature, air quality, everything, and makes adjustments in flight. And what it does is it bounces a sonic boom off of layers in the atmosphere, and it never reaches the ground. Essentially, it's outrunning the sonic boom, and it's absolutely fascinating how quickly that this technology is moving forward, and it's literally upon us now. And so this is a great piece of legislation, and I want to thank Chairman Nails for your leadership on this. It's something I'm extremely interested in. So with that, we are considering the bill for amendments. For what purpose does Mr. Nails seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Please designate.
An amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3410, offered by Mr. Nels of Texas, number 031.
Without objection, the amendment be considered as read. Mr. Nails, you recognize.
Sir, this amendment strengthens the intent of the periodic review required in the legislation and ensures that the administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration has the ultimate decision-making authority. This authority that will allow the administrator to be agile and reactive to advancements in engine technologies and pursue regulatory actions. Thank you, sir. I urge my colleagues. Everyone needs to get behind this legislation. I yield back.
I now recognize myself real quick. I do support this amendment. It's a minor clarifying edit that's going to strengthen the intent of the legislation to give the administrator of the FAA the ultimate decision-making authority while conducting a periodic review of the required bill. I would urge support of the amendment. Mr. Larson, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also support the amendment to the ANS H.R. 3410. The underlying bill would require the FAA to allow for a supersonic flight in the U.S. as long as the sonic boom does not reach the ground. The ANS includes important guardrails. This amendment would make a technical correction that clarifies the FAA's ability to regulate noise standards for these aircraft in the future, similar to other type of aircraft. And I want to thank Chair Nels for this important amendment and urge my colleagues to support it. Yield back.
Does anyone else wish to be heard on the amendment? Seeing none, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there any more amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3410? Hearing none, the question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3410. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed signify by saying nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute is adopted. The question is now on adoption of favorable reporting of H.R. 3410. As amended, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed signify by saying nay. In opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 3410 as amended is agreed to and favorably reported to the House, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Beautiful. All right. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 5783, the State Actions for Employing Transportation Risk Assessments and Crossing Knowledge Strategies Act. I'd ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Railroads, Pipelines, and Hazardous Materials from further consideration of H.R. 5783, and without objection, as so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration. Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. H.R. 5783 is a bipartisan legislation sponsored by Representative Poe to address instances of suicide at railroad right-of-ways. The FAST Act of 2015 included a provision for the development of a model state-specific highway grade crossing safety action plan. It further required each state to implement and report its own action plan. The law also requires the Federal Railroad Administration to periodically report to Congress on the implementation of these efforts. As H.R. 5783 would require the FRA, as part of the periodic reports to Congress, to provide updates on state activities to reduce incidences of suicide at on railroad property, including how states have to coordinate and consulted with relevant stakeholders to develop such strategies. I support this legislation and urge its adoption, and I recognize Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support H.R. 5783, the Safe Tracks Act, which is introduced by Representative Poe and Bost. This bill requires the FRA to review state highway rail grade crossing action plans and requires these plans to address how to reduce pedestrian fatalities along railroad rights-of-way. The leading causes of death along railroad rights-of-way are from pedestrian and grade crossing accidents. Representative Poe's bill requires states to work with railroads along with mental health and law enforcement agencies to reduce pedestrian fatalities and suicides. I want to thank Representative Poe and Bost for their bipartisan work on this bill and urge members to support it. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Webster.
They're good. Yep, sorry. Developing appropriate strategies and communicating those to planning officials and the general public is very important to ensuring public safety. Safety challenges are always evolving, and strategies used to address them must also evolve also. This bipartisan legislation ensures states, railroads, communities are all working together, closely together, to develop strategies to prevent deaths at rail crossings. It's one step we can take to all strive for increased safety. So I urge my colleagues to support the bill and yield back.
Ms. Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me just say that I want to thank those members that have spoke out in favor and support of this bill. But I want to speak with regards to the importance of this bill. You know, highway rail crossing remains among the most dangerous point in our transportation system and results in hundreds of fatality and thousands of collisions nationwide each year. Just this year alone, the Federal Railroad Administration reported over 30 highway rail grade crossing incidents and over a dozen injuries in New Jersey alone. And over 40 years of data determined that my district had 4 grade crossings in Garfield, East Rutherford, and Elmwood Park, among the 10 deadliest in New Jersey. This happens when nearly 1/3 of our state's 5,000 public rail crossing fails to meet federal safety standards. This is why I introduced the Safe Track Act to preserve momentum, maintain accountability, ensure that states can continue prioritizing safety in communities that are most at risk. While we made critical progress through the FAST Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Job Act, this bill recognizes that rail safety is not a one-time fix. Safe Tracks is a bipartisan, common-sense legislation, and I am grateful for Congressman Volz's partnership here. Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman. I urge all our colleagues to vote yes on this, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Wilson. Ms. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm proud to speak in support of H.R. 5783, the Safe Tracks Act. This bill's commitment to improving the data that is collected on highway rail grade crossings is imperative. Rail safety is critical in my district, which is why I have made it a priority through my work in Congress. The serious nature of rail safety is why I proudly joined the Congressional Rail Safety Caucus. We must act as a body to address rail safety. Sadly, nearly 200 Floridians in my community have died in rail collisions since 2017, and among those Floridians who passed, there were 158 on foot or on bicycles. Almost every day on the news, it seems like there is a new headline of a rail collision. This crisis must end. I look forward to seeing stakeholders, railroads, mental health agencies, and law enforcement each play specific roles in gathering information and ensuring effective coordination under this bill. As we must act to reduce pedestrian fatalities, this bill helps with that effort. And as we approach the upcoming surface transportation reauthorization, this bill stands as a strong marker of our commitment to serious rail safety improvements. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Does anyone else wish to be heard? Seeing no one, are there any amendments to H.R. 5783? Seeing none, we will now proceed to final passage of legislation. This is a good bill. I'd urge everyone to support it. The question is now on the adoption of favorable reporting of H.R. 5783. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 5783 is agreed to and will be favorably reported to the House. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 6480, the bill to direct the Administrator of General Services to submit a report to Congress on the state of the real estate portfolio of the Public Buildings Service and for other purposes. I'd ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management from further consideration of H.R. 6480, and without objection, that is so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration. Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read and open for amendment at any point. And I'd recognize myself for 5 minutes. And I want to thank Subcommittee Ranking Member Stanton and Subcommittee Chairman Perry for their work on this bipartisan legislation. This bill is going to improve transparency and support congressional oversight of the GSA's real estate portfolio by directing the GSA to begin reissuing the State of the Portfolio report. And I'd urge my colleagues to support the legislation. And I recognize Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I support H.R. 6480, legislation that Representative Stanton and Representative Perry introduced. H.R. 6480 directs the GSA Administrator to submit an annual report to Congress on the state of the Public Building Service real estate portfolio. These reports will provide Congress and the GSA with clear, consistent information on how federal property is being used and how needs are changing over time. The reports will detail the number of leases signed and terminated, the amount of square footage leased and occupied, plans for relocating agencies housed in federally owned buildings, and other valuable metrics. Regular reporting will help this committee carry out its oversight responsibilities and ensure federal buildings are managed efficiently and cost effectively. This bill will provide Congress with a better understanding of the impacts of proposed changes to the federal footprint and the relocation of federal agencies under consideration by this and by future administrations. So I support my colleagues and support this bill and ask folks to support it. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Stanton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise to speak in support of H.R. 6480. This bill will direct the Administrator of General Services, GSA, to submit a report to Congress on the state of the real estate portfolio of the Public Building Service. This committee is responsible for overseeing all federal property, but GSA does not give us a clear portfolio-wide view of how federal buildings are being used. We get lease prospectuses. We get scattered updates. We do not get a regular comprehensive report on public building service portfolio. For a system this large, this expensive, and this central to the functioning of government, that blind spot is unacceptable. That is why I introduced this bipartisan legislation co-sponsored by Chairman Perry. This is basic governance. We need complete information about the buildings where federal work is done. I urge my colleagues to support this important legislation. I yield back.
Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to be a co-sponsor of this bill, and I want to thank the ranking member of the Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management Subcommittee, Mr. Stanton, for his work on this piece of legislation. The General Services Administration used to produce this what they called the State of the Portfolio each year. This document contained critical information on GSA's real property holdings and summaries on costs, deferred maintenance, and savings. This committee often used this document for its oversight as it helped the taxpayer and Congress see trends of highly burdensome costs across GSA's entire real estate portfolio. However, GSA stopped producing this report. While we have been told that various pieces of the information can be found on GSA's website or upon request, not having the data in one usable document has significantly reduced transparency and increased cost and time. This bill directs the GSA to restart issuing this important report. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield the balance.
Does anyone else wish to be heard? Seeing no one, are there any amendments to H.R. 6480? Seeing none, we will now proceed to final passage of the legislation. The question is now on the adoption and favorable reporting of H.R. 6480. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 6480 is agreed to and will be favorably reported to the House. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 6481, the Federal Building Threat Notification Act. I'd ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management from further consideration of H.R. 6480. Without objection, that is so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration without objection. The first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I'd recognize myself real quick for a statement. I want to thank Subcommittee Ranking Member Stanton and Subcommittee Chairman Perry for their work on this legislation. This bill is going to improve safety and security at GSA-owned buildings nationwide. Specifically, the bill directs GSA to work with the Federal Protective Service to develop guidance on emergency communications to occupants of GSA-owned buildings. Ensuring clear communication protocols for threats to federal facilities is critical to the safety and security of federal workers and the public who visit those buildings. I'd urge my colleagues to support this bill and recognize Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the Federal Building Threat Notification Act, which Ranking Member Stanton and Chair Perry have co-sponsored. This bill directs the Administrator of GSA and the Director of the Federal Protective Service to develop and disseminate emergency communication guidance for facility security committees to use when life safety events threaten federal buildings owned and operated by GSA and protected by the FPS. This guidance will establish best practices and protocols on notifying building tenants of threats to a facility or its occupants. It will also provide instructions for enhanced safety practices during threats or heightened risks. Establishing standard coordinated communication during emergencies is essential to protect federal employees and the public. This is critically important as threats and attacks on federal buildings and public servants have become increasingly common. This bill will strengthen the ability of building security officials and occupants to respond quickly and effectively in situations that carry life and death consequences, helping to keep federal employees safe during emergencies. And I support the Federal Building Threat Notification Act. I urge my colleagues to do the same. And with that, I yield back.
Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 6481, the Federal Building Threat Notification Act, supports the safety of federal employees and visitors to GSA buildings by ensuring there is clear guidance on emergency communication. In August, the committee received a report on crime in and around federal buildings from the GSA and the Federal Protective Service as required by the Public Buildings reforms that we enacted in last year's Water Resources Development Act. The numbers were staggering. In fiscal year 2024, there were over 3,500 incidents recorded nationwide. These incidents included 763 threats, 142 weapons violations, 9 arson incidents, 43 burglaries, 3 homicide offenses, 12 sex offenses, and 1 kidnapping. On top of all of this, we know that the federal buildings are consistently targeted by terrorists and other bad actors. This bill ensures that there are standard procedures for notifying the occupants of each federal building about threats to their building and therefore them. I'm pleased to be a co-sponsor of this important legislation, and I urge my colleagues to support this bill. I yield the balance.
Mr. Stanton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and my the chairman of my subcommittee, Chairman Perry, I rise to speak in support of H.R. 6481. The bill will direct the GSA Administrator and the Federal Protective Services Director to develop and disseminate emergency communication guidance for building safety, security committees to execute in any case in which safety events threaten federal buildings owned and operated by GSA under the protection of FPS. This guidance includes best practices and protocols to inform building tenants of threats to the buildings or their occupants, and instructions for safety practices in response to threat or heightened risks. The bill designates officials in charge of implementing this guidance and requires the GSA Administrator to submit a report to Congress on best practices and protocols implemented. We need to make sure that everyone knows the protocols and keep everyone safe. This is basic safety and a good government bill, and I thank Chairman Perry for his support of legislation. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. I yield back.
Does anyone else wish to be heard? Seeing no one, are there any amendments to H.R. 6481? Seeing none, we will now proceed to final passage of the legislation. The question is now on the adoption, favorable reporting of H.R. 6481. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 6481 is agreed to and will be favorably reported to the House. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration includes 3 resolutions for projects in the General Services Administration's Capital Investment and Leasing Program. I'd ask unanimous consent to call up the resolutions en bloc. They are now considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, that is so ordered. I recognize myself real quick for a statement on the GSA resolutions en bloc. The 3 GSA resolutions we're considering today include alteration work on the Ronald Reagan Federal Building in Washington, D.C. to renovate the building for FBI headquarters and repair its curtain wall systems and additional authorization for the design of the courthouse in San Juan, Puerto Rico. The renovation of the Reagan Building and additional courthouse design authorization are funded but require this committee's authorization. Last week, we also hosted a members' briefing on the FBI headquarters prospectus led by the FBI and the GSA to provide an opportunity for members to with questions to have them answered. I'd like to thank Ranking Member Larson for working with us on that, and Subcommittee Chairman Perry for leading the discussion. And with that, I'd urge my colleagues to support these resolutions, and I now recognize Mr. Larson for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair, I support the en bloc GSA resolutions before us today. The courthouse construction resolution authorizes the GSA to begin the first phase of a multiple-phase design and construction project on the 26-acre federal campus in the Hato Rey section of San Juan, Puerto Rico. The new U.S. courthouse annex will supply 6 new courtrooms and 10 new chambers, augmenting the complex to a total of 12 courtrooms and 17 chambers, and provide long-term housing for the U.S. District Court of Puerto Rico and 2 existing buildings, the Federico de Gatao Federal Building and the Clemente Ruiz Nazario U.S. Courthouse, all be renovated to improve security and building performance. The en bloc also includes 1 renovation project and 1 alteration project at the Ronald Reagan Federal Office Building in D.C. The alteration project is designed to repair the existing wall systems and atrium skylight for a total cost of $36,196,000. The renovation project authorizes GSA to spend $844 million in previous appropriated funding to repair the Ronald Reagan Federal Building to serve as a new consolidated headquarters for the FBI. Support these resolutions and urge my colleagues to do the same. And with that, I yield back.
Does anyone else wish to be heard? Oh, Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, we're considering 3 GSA resolutions, including 2 related to the Ronald Reagan Federal Building and 1 related to the courthouse in Puerto Rico. First, let me say that we had what I thought was a very productive briefing by the FBI and the GSA last week on the FBI headquarters. I'm not sure many of us were fully aware of the absolutely dismal state of the Hoover Building literally for decades now. Concrete is not only falling down outside of the building, potentially onto pedestrians, but onto cars inside the garage and into office spaces that have since been condemned. The FBI is in a building that has spaces that are condemned. And that is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the failing systems and structural concerns. I mean, look, it's just worn out, folks. Now, the GSA has attempted to mitigate this, but it's sinking taxpayer funding into a building that, frankly, isn't salvageable without pouring, significant, but it's probably massive funding into it. It's just clear that the situation at the Hoover Building is critical, and further delays will potentially put employees and citizens near the building in harm's way. Constructing a new headquarters building is currently estimated at $4 to $5 billion. Just remind everybody that we're $38 trillion in debt, and we're not stopping anytime soon. We just don't have $4 to $5 billion sitting around, and the effort to get that amount of money for well over a decade have systematically failed time and time again. Investing the funds already appropriated to renovate the Reagan building makes sense at this time, both for the taxpayer and for the mission of the FBI, which must continue. The GSA and FBI have a clear plan and timeline, and there is already more than 600,000 square feet of space in the Reagan building sitting vacant. There's nobody in it right now. There's other vendors there, but 600,000 square feet of empty space that the taxpayers are paying for. Therefore, I would urge my colleagues to support these three resolutions. Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance.
Mr. Figurs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to speak to the process here and just to highlight some of the inconsistencies and hypocrisies in the process, particularly as they relate to someone who's from a state that just benefited from a very similar process. Just last week, I had the opportunity to sit at the groundbreaking of Space Command down in Huntsville, Alabama, which went through a very lengthy and drawn-out process to get us to the point where we got Friday. But it was the right thing to do. It was the right decision. There was an outlaid process that was followed multiple times, and it came to the conclusion that Huntsville was the best location for it. I completely agree and concur with my colleagues regarding the new need for an FBI. I've probably witnessed it firsthand, given my previous life and 2 different stints in Maine Justice. But there was a process laid out, and that process came out with a recommendation. And to have any administration circumvent that process, I think is something that we have to call out, something that we have to acknowledge. And I know that there'll be other venues and forums to have this battle out that is beyond this committee, but I could not sit here as a member who just benefited from almost an identical circumstance where a process recommended Huntsville. You had an administration at that point, a Democratic administration, that injected itself into that process and delayed that decision from ultimately being made. When I got here as a freshman, I immediately joined efforts with my Republican colleagues from the state of Alabama to make sure that we went back to the results of the process because it was the right thing to do. And if it's the right thing to do in a Democratic administration, it's the right thing to do in a Republican administration. And I think objectively speaking that, FBI needs a new building. I mean, they're about to move from a 50-year-old building to a 30-year-old building and spend billions of dollars in doing it. But just wanted to raise that. Not going to object or draw out the process, but I think there's value in having processes and there's values in holding administrations, regardless of political affiliation, to account for those processes. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Stanton.
I was just, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to acknowledge the presence of Leader Hoyer here and acknowledge his strong advocacy on this issue for many, many, many years, including up to this day. Your advocacy is very much appreciated.
Does anyone else wish to be heard? Hearing none. Are there any amendments to the GSA resolution en bloc? Hearing none. The question is now on the adoption of the GSA resolutions en bloc. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, the GSA resolutions en bloc are agreed to and approved. I also would like to, it's a pleasure to have Mr. Hoyer in the audience today. He's somebody that I have a great deal of respect for and have known a long time in this process. So welcome to the committee. Thank you all for participating in today's markup. I'd ask unanimous consent that each measure ordered adopted reported today be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute, incorporating any amendments adopted, and without objection, that is so ordered. I'd ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make all necessary technical, clarifying, conforming changes to each of the measures ordered reported today that reflect the actions of the committee, and without objection, that is so ordered. Pursuant to House Rule 22, Clause 1, I'd ask unanimous consent that the chairman of this or his designee be authorized to offer such motions as may be necessary in the House to go to conference with the Senate on the legislation adopted today or any similar measure, and without objection, that is so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman, after consultation with the ranking member, have authority to strike or revise any provision of the measures reported today that would cause a sequential referral to another committee or that would cause the bill to be subject to a Budget Act or Rule 21 cut-go point of order. And without objection, that is so ordered. Pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2L, I'd ask unanimous consent that all members of the committee have at least 2 calendar days in which to file any supplemental, minority, additional, or dissenting views on the legislation adopted today, and without objection, that is so ordered. Pursuant to Rule 6 of the Rules of the Committee on Transportation Infrastructure, I note the presence of a quorum for all actions taken on committee business today, and with that, the Committee on Transportation Infrastructure has completed its business, and the committee is adjourned.